Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. Alright, let's talk about one of the most terrifying, relentless, and enigmatic forces in the Warhammer 40k universe, the Tyranids. These creatures aren't just another alien menace. They are the cosmic apex predators, an all-consuming swarm that sweeps across galaxies like an unstoppable plague. They don't negotiate, don't conquer for power or ideology, they devour. Planets, civilizations, entire star systems, all reduced to lifeless husks in their wake. And the scariest part? They're not just acting on primal hunger. There's intelligence behind this horror. A singular, unfathomable will that guides every Tyranid organism, the hive mind. But here's the real question. Is this just a mindless swarm following base instincts? Or is there something far more sinister at play? Could the hive mind be orchestrating the longest game in galactic history, moving with a patience that spans millennia? What if everything we've seen so far, every invasion, every seemingly random attack, is just another calculated step in a plan so vast that no other race can even comprehend it? To understand the true danger of the Tyranids, we have to go deeper. What exactly is the hive mind? What is its endgame? And more importantly, can anything in the galaxy actually stop it? If there's one thing that sets the Tyranids apart from every other faction in Warhammer 40k, it's the hive mind. This isn't just some vague collective instinct or a primitive swarm mentality, it's something far more terrifying. The Tyranids don't have individual thoughts, leaders, or even real personalities. Every single creature, from the smallest ripper to the monstrous hive tyrant, is just an extension of one vast, unfathomable intelligence. And that intelligence isn't just alive, it's aware, it's calculating, it's evolving. Think about that for a second. Most species in the galaxy rely on some kind of command structure. Even the most disciplined armies need leaders, need decision-makers. The Imperium has its generals, the Eldari have their seers, even Chaos has its warlords, scheming and betraying each other. But the Tyranids? They don't have hierarchy in the traditional sense. There's no debate, no hesitation, no competing ambitions. There is only the hive mind, an all-encompassing consciousness that directs its forces with perfect, absolute control. It's like fighting an enemy that doesn't just anticipate your every move. It is every move, reacting, adapting, and outmaneuvering you in ways no mortal mind could ever hope to match. This is what makes them so horrifying. You're not dealing with individuals that can be reasoned with or broken down psychologically. You're fighting something more akin to a force of nature, a tidal wave of living, breathing nightmares, all moving with singular purpose. The hive mind doesn't feel fear, it doesn't hesitate, it doesn't get tired, and it doesn't make mistakes, not in the way we understand them. When a Tyranid force is defeated, that knowledge isn't lost. The hive mind remembers, it learns, it adapts. Every battle, every skirmish, every moment of resistance, it all becomes data, absorbed into this colossal galaxy-spanning intelligence. And here's the kicker. No one really knows where the hive mind's true consciousness resides. Is it spread equally across every Tyranid organism, existing everywhere at once? Is there some kind of central intelligence, some unseen entity lurking in the depths of space, directing the swarms from afar? Some fan theories even suggest that what we see now, the hive fleets, the invasions, the endless hunger, is just the first stage of its existence. What if the hive mind is still growing, still becoming something greater? What if all of this, every devoured world, every adaptation, is just part of some colossal metamorphosis that we can't even begin to understand? There's a chilling thought that surfaces in a lot of discussions among fans. What if the Tyranids aren't just invading the galaxy, but testing it? Every major species has faced them in battle, and every time, the hive mind learns more. It's not just consuming biomass, it's absorbing tactics, strengths, weaknesses. And what if that's the real goal? What if the hive mind is refining itself, preparing for something even worse? Some speculate that the Tyranids fled their original galaxy, not because they devoured everything, but because something else forced them to run. And now, in the Milky Way, they're evolving into the ultimate weapon, getting ready for a war that hasn't even begun yet. The Imperium has spent centuries trying to understand the hive mind, and the more they learn, the worse it gets. The Ordo Xenos has theorized that each hive fleet might be an independent fragment of the whole, like individual fingers of a much larger hand. That means the fleets we've seen so far, Behemoth, Kraken, Leviathan could just be scouting parties. Imagine that. Everything we've seen, all the destruction, all the near-apocalyptic wars, just the first wave. The real threat might not even be here yet. And what happens if the hive mind ever achieves true dominance over the galaxy? Right now, its influence is strongest near powerful synapse creatures like hive tyrants and warriors. But imagine a scenario where the hive mind reaches such a level of psychic power that everything in the galaxy falls under its control. No resistance, no war, just an ocean of biological perfection, shifting and reshaping as the hive mind sees fit. Some call this idea ridiculous, but others, they're not so sure. After all, the Tyranids don't just consume, they assimilate. They take what is useful and discard the rest. And what's the ultimate endgame of such a process? A form of life so advanced, so perfectly adapted, that nothing can challenge it. Maybe that's the hive mind's true goal. Not just survival, not just consumption, but perfection. A galaxy-spanning intelligence that can never be stopped, never be outmatched. A singular will, stretching across the stars, feeding, growing, evolving, until it finally becomes something truly unstoppable. And if that's the case, then the war against the Tyranids isn't just about survival. It's about stopping the inevitable. The only question is, can we? The Tyranids didn't come from some distant corner of the galaxy. They came from outside of it. That alone makes them different from every other faction in Warhammer 40k. The Imperium, the Eldari, the Orcs, everyone else has their origins within the Milky Way, shaped by its history, its conflicts, its cosmic horrors. But the Tyranids? They're alien in the truest sense. They traveled across the void between galaxies, a place where time and space stretch into madness, where nothing should be able to survive, and yet they did. They endured the cold, the emptiness, the sheer impossibility of intergalactic travel, all for one reason. They were coming here. But why? That's the question that's kept inquisitors, magi biologists, and fans alike theorizing for decades. What could drive an entire species, no, an entire superorganism, to abandon their home galaxy and make the near-impossible journey across the dark void of space? Some believe the answer is simple. They ate everything. The Tyranids are a swarm, a force of endless consumption. It makes sense that, given enough time, they would eventually devour their entire home galaxy, strip it of every last scrap of biomass, and be left with nothing but barren, lifeless rocks. If that's true, then the Tyranids coming to the Milky Way isn't part of some grand plan. It's an act of desperation. They need to feed, and we just happen to be the next meal. But others aren't so sure. If the Tyranids were simply fleeing starvation, why didn't they arrive all at once? Why send hive fleets in waves? Why approach from multiple directions instead of overwhelming the galaxy in one coordinated strike? Some argue that the hive mind isn't just running, it's expanding. It's not just looking for food, it's spreading its influence, one step at a time. Maybe the Milky Way isn't the final destination. Maybe it's just another step in an even longer migration. Another galaxy to consume before moving on to the next. That's a terrifying thought. The idea that the Tyranids have done this before, countless times, moving from galaxy to galaxy like a cosmic plague, wiping out entire civilizations, and then moving on without a second thought. And then there's an even darker theory, one that suggests the Tyranids aren't the apex predators we think they are. What if they're running from something? Some have speculated that the Tyranids didn't consume their home galaxy at all. Instead, something else drove them out. Something worse. A nightmare so unfathomable that even the hive mind, with all its cold, ruthless intelligence, chose to abandon everything and escape into the void. If that's true, then the Milky Way isn't just a feeding ground. It's a fortress. The Tyranids are devouring everything not just to sustain themselves, but to grow strong enough to face whatever it is they left behind. Of course, there's no proof of this. No one has ever seen what lies beyond our galaxy, and no one really knows how long the Tyranids have been traveling. But the possibility lingers, an unanswered question that makes the whole situation even worse. If something did drive the Tyranids out of their original galaxy, what happens when it catches up? Would we even notice the difference? Or would we all just disappear into the void, swallowed by something even more incomprehensible than the hive mind itself? There's another theory, one that paints the hive mind in a completely different light. What if the Tyranids aren't just an engine of destruction, but a form of cosmic balance? The Warhammer 40k universe is defined by excess, an endless cycle of war, corruption, and decay. The Imperium stagnates under its own brutal rule, chaos festers and spreads, and ancient species cling to their dying empires. What if the Tyranids are here to reset everything? A force that strips away the old, leaving behind a blank slate for something new? Some even speculate that the Tyranids are part of some ancient natural process, a kind of galactic immune system, cleansing the universe of civilizations that have reached their breaking point. And yet there's still one question no one has been able to answer. Why now? The galaxy has existed for billions of years. Countless civilizations have risen and fallen. Why did the Tyranids arrive at this moment in history? Some believe it's a coincidence, just another step in their endless hunger. But others think it's something more. Maybe the psychic beacon of the Emperor's Astronomicon, shining like a lighthouse in the warp, drew them in. Maybe the opening of the Great Rift, splitting reality itself, triggered some unseen response in the hive mind. Or maybe, just maybe, their arrival was always inevitable. The truth is, we don't know what the Tyranids really want. Survival? Domination? Evolution? Something far beyond our comprehension? All we know for certain is that they're here, and they're not stopping. Whatever the grand plan of the hive mind is, if it even has one, it's unfolding right now, across the battlefields of a dying galaxy. And we might not realize what it was until it's already too late. If there's one thing that makes the Tyranids truly terrifying, it's not just their numbers or their hunger, it's their ability to evolve. Every other faction in the galaxy has limits. The Imperium struggles to maintain its technology, the Eldari are trapped in the shadow of their own downfall, and even chaos, for all its madness, is bound by the whims of the warp. But the Tyranids? They change. They adapt. Every battle, every war, every failed invasion is just another step in their endless process of improvement. Defeating a Tyranid hive fleet doesn't mean you've won. It means you've taught them. And next time, they'll come back stronger. This isn't evolution in the slow generational sense that most species experience. The Tyranids don't need millions of years to develop new traits. They do it in real time. When they invade a world, they don't just consume its biomass, they consume its genetic potential. They break down everything they devour, analyze its strengths, and then integrate those useful traits into new bioforms. It's like fighting an army that rewrites its own biology with every encounter, crafting the perfect response to whatever you throw at it. If a planet's defenders rely on heavy fortifications, the hive mind will spawn more burrowing creatures. If an enemy has particularly devastating firepower, the next wave of Tyranids will arrive with thicker armor or new defensive adaptations. It's not just strategy, it's biological warfare at its most terrifying level. One of the best examples of this was the Tyranid invasion of the Octarius system. When Hive Fleet Leviathan clashed with the massive Orc Empire of Octarius, it wasn't just a war, it was an experiment. The Orcs, being the war-hungry lunatics they are, didn't just get wiped out. They fought back harder than almost any other species, creating a brutal, never-ending conflict. And what happened? The Tyranids thrived. They kept throwing wave after wave of bioforms into the meat grinder, absorbing the best Orc traits, becoming stronger, faster, more resilient. They wanted this fight because every battle made them better. And now, splinter fleets that have escaped from Octarius are some of the deadliest Tyranid strains the galaxy has ever seen. This raises an uncomfortable question. Are the Tyranids just reacting to threats, or are they deliberately seeking them out? Some fans believe that the hive mind doesn't just consume biomass, it actively hunts powerful enemies as a way to refine itself. Think about it. If the Tyranids were purely driven by hunger, wouldn't they target weaker, undefended planets first? Instead, they've attacked some of the most dangerous strongholds in the galaxy, from Ultramar to Baal to Octarius. It's almost like they want resistance, because every time they struggle against a powerful opponent, they gain something valuable. Even their defeats work in their favor. Take the Battle of Macragge, where the Ultramarines barely managed to stop Hive Fleet Behemoth. The Imperium celebrated that victory, but what did the Tyranids do? They changed. Instead of attacking as one massive force again, later, hive fleets like Kraken split into countless smaller swarms, overwhelming enemies with surgical precision instead of brute force. The lessons of Macragge were absorbed into the Tyranid genetic code, and their tactics shifted accordingly. Every time they're pushed back, they don't just regroup, they evolve. The hive mind isn't just shaping individual creatures, it's shaping itself. Each battle makes it smarter, more efficient, more dangerous. It doesn't need to invent new weapons or discover new technologies. It is the weapon. It is the technology. It doesn't just adapt to survive, it adapts to win. And if that's the case, then stopping the Tyranids isn't just about fighting them. It's about stopping their learning process. The problem is, no one knows how. What's worse, some fans have suggested that this evolution has no upper limit. Most species reach a point where they can no longer significantly improve without hitting some kind of biological or technological wall. But the Tyranids? There's no reason to believe they have a final form. Every war, every consumed species, every tactical refinement could just be another step in a never-ending transformation. And if that's true, then the galaxy is fighting something that only gets stronger. So what's the endgame? Is the hive mind just refining itself endlessly, or is there a point where it will become something entirely new? What happens if it reaches a state of perfect adaptation, something so advanced that nothing can ever challenge it again? Some believe that's exactly what the Tyranids are striving for, a state where they no longer need to evolve, because they've finally achieved the ultimate biological form. What that looks like, no one knows. And if it ever happens, well, let's just hope we never find out. At first glance, Tyranid invasions seem like mindless, all-consuming onslaughts, vast hive fleets descending upon planets, drowning them in wave after wave of chitin and claws, reducing entire civilizations to nothing but biomass. But the more you look at how they operate, the more you start to wonder, is this really just a blind, hunger-driven rampage, or is there something far more calculated at play? Are the Tyranids simply following their instincts, or is the hive mind executing a plan, one so massive, so alien in scope, that we can barely comprehend it? The Imperium, Eldari, and even Chaos forces have tried to categorize the Tyranid threat, labeling their attacks as separate hive fleets: Behemoth, Kraken, Leviathan, and countless splinter fleets that branch off from them. But here's the thing, what if these fleets aren't separate at all? What if every single Tyranid movement, every seemingly isolated incursion, is just another limb of the same vast intelligence, working towards an objective that we can't see? Some fans have speculated that the different hive fleets are actually coordinating on a galactic scale, each one testing different strategies, probing different weaknesses, and feeding all of that information back into the hive mind. Think about how the fleets have evolved. Behemoth was a brute force assault, a direct charge into the Imperium's heart, testing how well the galaxy could resist a full-scale invasion. When that failed, Kraken took a different approach, spreading itself thin, attacking multiple targets at once, overwhelming defenses through sheer unpredictability. Then came Leviathan, which bypassed the usual galactic plane entirely, striking from below the Milky Way, catching defenders off guard and forcing them to scramble in ways they never had before. These aren't just random attacks, they're experiments. Even the way Tyranid fleets move suggests a terrifying level of intent. They don't behave like traditional military campaigns, where forces gather, push forward, establish supply lines, and hold territory. The Tyranids don't need supply lines, they are the supply. They strip planets bare, convert that biomass into new bioforms, and keep going without slowing down. And yet they choose not to flood the galaxy all at once. The hive mind clearly has the numbers to unleash an apocalyptic swarm, but it doesn't. Instead, it sends fleets in waves, targeting different regions, attacking different species, absorbing new genetic material, and adapting as it goes. Some believe this means the hive mind is still learning, that every attack is just another stage in its refinement process, testing the galaxy's defenses, finding the weak points, and preparing for something much, much worse. Others argue that the Tyranids are following a larger, long-term strategy, one that doesn't just involve consuming planets, but manipulating the very course of galactic history. There's even speculation that some Hive fleets have deliberately sacrificed themselves to achieve strategic objectives. What if Behemoth's defeat at Macragge wasn't a failure, but a calculated move to lure the Imperium into overextending itself? What if Leviathan's war against the Orcs in Octarius wasn't just about biomass, but about creating the deadliest, most war-hardened Tyranid strain possible? There's also the unnerving idea that the Tyranids might be hurting the galaxy's inhabitants. Some patterns in their invasions suggest that they aren't just attacking at random, they're subtly shaping the movement of other factions, forcing them into conflicts they otherwise wouldn't have had. Did the Tyranids deliberately push the Imperium and the Tihau closer together, setting the stage for future war? Are they funneling chaos forces towards certain regions, weakening them before launching a true invasion? The possibility that the hive mind is playing a long game, nudging events towards some grand design, is both fascinating and horrifying. The scariest part? There's no way to predict what comes next. If every hive fleet so far has been a different strategy, what happens when the Tyranids finally perfect their approach? What happens when they no longer need to test or adapt, when they've learned everything they need to know about their prey? Right now, we see them as an unstoppable force of nature, but what if this is just the beginning? What if the real Tyranid invasion hasn't even started yet? There's something about the Tyranids that makes them terrifying even before they arrive. Long before the first mycetic spores hit the surface, before the skies darken with gargoyles, before the ground shakes under the weight of carnifexes, entire star systems fall silent. Astropaths scream in agony before their minds burn out. Psychic communications go dead. Warp travel becomes a death sentence. And then, in the deafening, suffocating void that follows, the Tyranids descend. This is the shadow in the warp, a phenomenon as mysterious as it is devastating, and one of the most horrifying weapons in the hive mind's arsenal. Or is it even a weapon at all? No one truly understands how the shadow in the warp works, but its effects are undeniable. It blankets entire sectors in a kind of psychic suppression field, cutting off any connection to the warp. For the Imperium, this means astropaths can no longer send distress signals, fleets can't coordinate reinforcements, and entire planets are left isolated and vulnerable. But it's not just about logistics. The shadow doesn't just block psychic energy, it drowns it, flooding the minds of psychers with an overwhelming presence that reduces them to madness. Even the strongest psychers, those who have fought daemons and survived the horrors of the warp, have been driven to insanity under its weight. Some collapse into catatonia. Others start screaming in alien tongues. The weakest simply die. The obvious question is whether this is a deliberate attack or just a natural byproduct of the hive mind's presence. Some believe it's an intentional weapon, an offensive strategy designed to cripple any psychic-dependent civilization before the Tyranids even make planetfall. And honestly, that theory makes a lot of sense. The Imperium, the Eldari, and even Chaos rely heavily on psychers to communicate, navigate, and fight. By smothering the warp, the Tyranids strip away one of the galaxy's most important tools, making resistance that much harder. It's a way of softening up the prey before the feast begins. But then there's the other side of the argument. The idea that the shadow in the warp isn't a weapon at all, but simply an unintended consequence of the hive mind's sheer psychic magnitude. Think about it. The Tyranids don't just have a lot of psychic creatures, they are a single massive psychic entity. Every bioform is connected through synapse links, all feeding into the larger intelligence of the hive mind. Maybe the shadow in the warp isn't an attack, but simply the effect of something that massive existing in real space. It's like trying to whisper next to a roaring inferno. The sheer scale of the hive mind's presence drowns out everything else. If that's the case, then the implications are terrifying. Because if the shadow in the warp is just an accidental side effect, that means the hive mind isn't even trying to suppress the warp. It's just something that happens naturally when it gets close. So what if the hive mind wanted to focus its psychic power? What if it could weaponize the shadow deliberately? If the current phenomenon is just a passive effect, then the Tyranids may have the potential to develop something far worse, an active ability to crush the minds of every psyker in a system instantly. to erase entire planetary defenses in a single thought. There's another disturbing layer to this, the effect the shadow has on chaos. The Tyranids are one of the few major forces in the galaxy that seem completely immune to the corruption of the warp. They don't worship gods, they don't make bargains, and demonic influence seems to slide off them entirely. When Tyranid fleets clash with chaos forces, the warp-born creatures can't possess them, can't tempt them, can't even feed off their emotions, because the Tyranids don't have emotions in any way the warp can manipulate. It's as if the hive mind operates on an entirely different wavelength from everything else in the galaxy. Some fans even speculate that the shadow in the warp isn't just a suppression field, but a form of psychic purification. A presence so overwhelming that it literally drowns out chaos itself. If that's true, then the hive mind might be the only real counter to the forces of the warp. Not because it's trying to fight chaos, but simply because it exists in a way that chaos can't infect. And that raises an even weirder possibility. What if the shadow in the warp isn't just a phenomenon, but a reaction? What if the Tyranids are so alien to the galaxy's natural psychic flow that their presence causes a kind of reality-distorting shockwave? Maybe the hive mind isn't suppressing the warp on purpose. Maybe the warp itself is recoiling from the hive mind, unable to process something so completely outside its normal rules. If that's the case, then the Tyranids don't just represent an existential threat to the material universe. They could be a threat to the warp itself. At the end of the day, no one knows for sure whether the shadow in the warp is an intentional attack or a natural side effect. Maybe it's both. Maybe the hive mind is aware of the effect and simply uses it to its advantage. Or maybe it hasn't begun to tap into its full potential. What we do know is that, by the time the shadow falls, it's already too late. The enemy is here, the swarm is coming, and no one is listening to your screams. The Tyranids are an unstoppable force, a cosmic plague that spreads, consumes, and evolves without mercy, or at least, that's how it feels. Every encounter with the hive fleets leaves devastation in its wake. Entire civilizations reduced to lifeless husks, their genetic material repurposed for the next stage of the swarm's evolution. But here's the thing. Despite all their terrifying adaptability, despite their overwhelming numbers and sheer brute force, the Tyranids have been defeated. Not often. Not easily. But it has happened. Take the Battle of Makraj, for example. Hive fleet behemoth came crashing into the realm of Ultramar, throwing everything it had at the Ultramarines. It was the first full-scale Tyranid invasion the Imperium had ever faced, and the cost was nearly catastrophic. But in the end, the Ultramarines won. Sure, it was a victory so costly that their chapter took centuries to recover, but they still managed to shatter Behemoth's momentum, stopping it before it could push further into Imperial space. To this day, Makraj stands as proof that, with the right strategy, the right firepower, and a whole lot of sacrifice, the Tyranids can be stopped. Then there was Hive Fleet Kraken. This time, the Tyranids learned from Makraj. They didn't attack as one massive horde, but instead spread themselves thin, launching countless simultaneous strikes across the galaxy. They managed to devastate multiple worlds, even nearly wiping out entire Space Marine chapters like the Scythes of the Emperor. But again, they lost. The Imperium, the Aeldari, and even the Tau all managed to push back different tendrils of Kraken, forcing the Hive Fleet into retreat. Even Leviathan, the largest Tyranid force yet, suffered a brutal defeat during the devastation of Baal. The Blood Angels and their successor chapters, against all odds, held their homeworld against impossible odds. And just when it seemed like the swarm was about to win, the warp itself intervened. Chaos forces tore through reality, wiping out vast portions of the Tyranid fleet before vanishing as suddenly as they appeared. So, if the Tyranids can be beaten, why aren't they gone for good? Why do they keep coming back stronger than before? This is where things get unsettling. What if these so-called defeats were never really defeats at all? What if they were just tests? Think about it. The hive mind doesn't fear failure the way other factions do. When an Imperial army is crushed, those losses are irreplaceable. When an Eldari craftworld falls, an entire ancient civilization dies with it. But when a Tyranid fleet is destroyed, all that knowledge, all that genetic material, returns to the hive mind. It learns from every loss. Every battle, whether won or lost, just adds more data to the swarm's evolutionary process. Some fans even believe that Hive Fleet Behemoth was meant to lose, that it was a sacrificial first wave, sent into the galaxy to probe its defenses, to analyze how the Imperium fought, to test their strategies, their weaknesses. And once the hive mind had its answers, it adjusted. Kraken didn't make behemoths' mistakes. Leviathan didn't make Krakens. Every fleet that follows is stronger, more efficient, more difficult to defeat. It's like fighting an opponent that keeps downloading patches, upgrading itself after every engagement. Even more disturbing is the idea that some Tyranid forces deliberately retreat when the hive mind determines that further fighting isn't worth the resources. This isn't just some mindless swarm fighting to the bitter end. It's an intelligence that knows when to cut its losses. If a battle isn't worth the biomass being spent, the Tyranids will simply leave, waiting for a better time to strike. What if that's what really happened at Baal? Sure, the Blood Angels survived, but the Hive fleet got what it wanted: genetic material from some of the most powerful space marines in existence. What if that's the real goal? Not immediate victory, but harvesting? And then there's the question of scale. Every fleet the galaxy has fought so far, Behemoth, Kraken, Leviathan, might just be fragments of something much larger. The Tyranids aren't native to this galaxy. They came from somewhere else. And if what we've seen so far is just the beginning, just scouting parties or experimental waves, then what happens when the real invasion begins? So, are the Tyranids truly unstoppable? Maybe not. Maybe the galaxy has found ways to hold them back, to stall their advance. But stopping them permanently? Wiping them out completely? That's another question entirely. Because every time we think we've won, the hive mind adapts. It waits, it grows, and when it returns, it's always stronger than before. Maybe the biggest mistake isn't underestimating the Tyranids, it's thinking that victory over them actually means anything. Because in the long game, the only one learning from these battles is them. The Tyranids consume. That's the one thing everyone agrees on. They descend upon worlds, strip them of every ounce of organic matter, and move on. It's a cycle of endless hunger, a biological imperative that drives them to feed, evolve, and repeat. But here's the question no one can fully answer. Why? Is it really just about survival? Or is there something deeper, something far more terrifying behind their relentless advance? Most assume that the hive mind is nothing more than an apex predator on a galactic scale, an organism that exists solely to propagate itself, devouring everything in its path simply because that's what it does. But when you really start analyzing how the Tyranids operate, things don't quite add up. If they were just mindless consumers, why do they select certain targets while avoiding others? Why do they sometimes linger in war zones when easier prey is available elsewhere? Why do they adapt so specifically to the strengths of the species they fight instead of just overwhelming them with raw numbers? Some believe that the Tyranids are after more than just biomass. They're after perfection. Not in the way that humans or Eldari might define it, but in a purely biological sense. Every new battle, every new species they encounter is an opportunity to refine themselves, to incorporate superior traits into their genetic code. They don't just want to consume life, they want to become the ultimate life form, a single, ever-adapting, ever-evolving entity that can overcome any challenge, no matter how powerful. If that's the case, then the Tyranids aren't just feeding, they're harvesting. Think about how their invasions work. They don't simply consume at random, they systematically break down a planet, absorbing its genetic potential, taking only what is useful. When they faced the orcs in Octarius, they didn't just wipe them out. They let the war drag on, ensuring that only the strongest, most brutal orcs remained before finally absorbing their biomass. When they fought the Blood Angels at Baal, they didn't just kill space marines. They gathered genetic material from some of the Imperium's most legendary warriors. These aren't the actions of a mindless swarm. This is something that chooses what to take, that refines itself with every new conquest. Some fans have even suggested that the Tyranids may have a specific goal in mind, some ultimate form that the hive mind is working toward. Maybe they're searching for the perfect balance of intelligence, strength, adaptability, and resilience. Maybe they need something they haven't found yet, a particular genetic trait, a unique adaptation that will push them to their final evolutionary state. And maybe, just maybe, that trait hasn't appeared yet because it's not in their genetic pool yet. What if that's why they're so drawn to the Milky Way? This galaxy is home to some of the strangest, most powerful life forms in the known universe. The Eldari have psychic abilities that surpass anything the Tyranids have ever encountered. The Necrons wield technology that defies the laws of physics. The Imperium has genetically engineered super soldiers capable of feats beyond normal biology. Even Chaos, with all its warp-spawned corruption, represents a force unlike anything the Tyranids have ever consumed before. What if this isn't just another feeding ground? What if this is the missing piece? Then there's the question of the warp. The Tyranids seem immune to chaos in a way that no other species is. They don't succumb to demonic possession, they don't worship gods, and they don't seem to generate the same kind of psychic resonance that other life forms do. But what if that's deliberate? What if the hive mind is specifically trying to avoid corruption while it evolves? Or, an even more disturbing thought, what if they're looking for a way to harness it? Imagine if the Tyranids, with their ability to rapidly adapt and absorb new traits, ever figured out how to use warp energy the way psychers do. An army that can generate and manipulate psychic power, but without the vulnerabilities of chaos, without emotions to corrupt or minds to tempt. A force that could rival even the chaos gods themselves. And then there's the final, most terrifying possibility. What if the Tyranids aren't looking for something in the Milky Way, but are instead preparing for something outside of it? Some have speculated that the hive mind's relentless drive to consume, evolve, and expand isn't just about survival, it's about preparation. For what? No one knows. But what if the Tyranids have already encountered something far worse than themselves? Something that forced them to flee their original galaxy? Something that made them realize they weren't strong enough yet? What if everything they're doing, all the invasions, all the adaptation, all the relentless harvesting, isn't just about dominating the Milky Way, but about ensuring that when the real enemy arrives, they're ready? At the end of the day, we still don't know what the hive mind's ultimate goal is. Maybe it really is just an insatiable predator, driven purely by hunger. Or maybe it's something else entirely, something ancient, something patient, something with a plan so vast and so alien that we can't even begin to understand it. The only thing we do know is that the Tyranids aren't stopping. They keep coming, they keep evolving, and they always have a reason for what they do. The only question left is, when they finally get what they're looking for, will there be anything left in the galaxy to stop them? The Tyranids are already one of the biggest mysteries in Warhammer 40k, but if there's one thing the fanbase loves, it's coming up with theories that take that mystery to the next level. Are they just a swarm of mindless consumers, or is there something bigger, something more terrifying, guiding their actions? Over the years, some of the most dedicated fans have crafted theories that range from eerily plausible to absolutely insane. But the scariest part? Some of them might actually be true. One of the most popular theories is that the hive fleets we've seen so far aren't even the real Tyranid invasion. Think about it. The Milky Way is massive, but the Tyranids came from outside of it. If what we've seen is just a fraction of their true numbers, then where's the rest of them? Some believe the hive mind is only sending scouting forces, testing the galaxy's defenses, gathering genetic material, and adapting before the main force arrives. Every defeat, every retreat, every splinter fleet lost isn't a failure. It's data being fed back into the hive mind, refining its approach. And when that final true wave comes, it won't be an invasion. It'll be an extinction event. Then there's the theory that the Tyranids didn't come here by accident. Some fans speculate that they were lured to the Milky Way, possibly by the Emperor's psychic beacon, the Astronomicon. To the Imperium, it's a guiding light, helping ships navigate the warp. But to the Tyranids, it could be a dinner bell ringing across the void, drawing them in like moths to a flame. If that's true, then humanity didn't just attract the Tyranids, they might be directly responsible for their arrival. And if the Astronomicon is the reason they're here, shutting it down might be the only way to stop them. But that would also cripple the Imperium, leaving it blind and vulnerable, a no-win scenario. Another terrifying theory suggests that the Tyranids aren't just eating for survival, they're building something. What if all the biomass they consume isn't just for creating more warriors, but for constructing something far greater? Some fans speculate that the hive mind's ultimate goal is to merge all organic matter into one colossal, universe-spanning entity, a singular, perfect organism that is the Tyranids. Every consumed species, every absorbed genetic trait, all leading to a final evolutionary state where the hive mind no longer needs to spread. It simply is. If that's the case, then every battle is just another step toward something that no force in the galaxy could ever hope to stop. And then there's the wildest theory of them all, the idea that the Tyranids aren't just another faction in 40k's endless war. They're the end of it. Some fans believe the Tyranids are a natural reset button for the galaxy, a kind of biological failsafe designed to wipe the slate clean when civilizations reach their breaking point. It's no secret that the Warhammer universe is a place of endless conflict, stagnation, and decay. Maybe the Tyranids aren't here to conquer. Maybe they're here to purge, to clear the galaxy of its ancient, crumbling empires and start everything over from scratch. A hard reset. No Imperium. No chaos. No orcs, Eldari, or Necrons. Just the hive mind, absorbing everything until there's nothing left but biological perfection. Of course, these are just theories. Maybe the Tyranids are just an insatiable force of nature, driven purely by hunger with no grand scheme behind them. Maybe there is no ultimate plan, no greater intelligence guiding them, just an endless, instinctual need to feed. But if even one of these theories turns out to be true, then the galaxy isn't just doomed. It was always doomed. The Tyranids were never just a threat to civilization. They might be something far worse, the final chapter of history itself. The Tyranids are relentless. Every time they're pushed back, they return stronger. Every time they consume a world, they move on to the next. It's an endless cycle. Devour, evolve, expand. But that raises a terrifying question. Will they ever stop? Is there a point where the Tyranids will have consumed enough, where the hive mind will finally be satisfied? Or is their expansion truly infinite, a hunger that can never be quenched? Most would assume the answer is obvious. The Tyranids are driven by a biological imperative to consume, meaning they'll never stop until there's nothing left. They don't negotiate, they don't settle, they don't create, they just take. And if they've already stripped one galaxy bare before moving on to this one, then what's to say they won't do the same here and keep moving forever? If that's the case, then the Warhammer 40k universe is just another meal, a temporary stop on an eternal path of destruction. But then again, what if there is an end goal? What if the Tyranids aren't expanding just for the sake of it, but because they're working toward something? Some fans believe the hive mind has a final evolutionary state, some perfect biological form it's trying to achieve. Maybe once it gathers enough genetic material, once it absorbs every useful trait in existence, it will no longer need to expand. The swarm will stop, not because it's run out of food, but because it has finally become the ultimate life form. That theory opens up a whole new set of horrifying possibilities. If the Tyranids do have an endgame, then what happens when they reach it? Will they consolidate into a single, godlike organism? Will they reshape the galaxy into a living, breathing ecosystem entirely under their control? Or will they simply hibernate, waiting for millions of years until new life emerges, only to begin the cycle all over again? If the Tyranids have done this before, then it's possible we're just living through one phase of a much larger cosmic pattern, one that repeats every time a galaxy reaches its peak. And then there's the question of logistics. Right now, the Tyranids are terrifying because they seem endless. But is that really sustainable? At some point, even they must reach limits. A hive fleet requires vast amounts of biomass, and while they regenerate and adapt quickly, there has to be a tipping point where the number of organisms they control becomes too much. Even for the hive mind. What happens when the Tyranids consume so much that they physically can't manage their own numbers? Do they split into rival swarms? Do they collapse under their own weight? Some speculate that this is exactly why we see different hive fleets attacking from multiple directions. The Tyranids might not be a single cohesive force, but rather fragments of a once unified intelligence, that's already grown too large to maintain itself. If that's the case, then the Tyranids might not expand forever, but instead grow until they break apart, becoming smaller, self-contained swarms that eventually collapse or evolve into something else entirely. But maybe the scariest possibility isn't that they'll never stop, it's that they can't. What if the hive mind itself is trapped in an evolutionary cycle it can't break free from? Every battle, every genetic refinement, every invasion, it all feeds back into a system that was never designed to end. The Tyranids don't just consume because they want to, they consume because they must. The moment they stop, they starve. The moment they run out of new DNA to absorb, they stagnate. Maybe that's why they fled their original galaxy, because they reached their limit, and instead of stopping, they simply moved on. If that's true, then the Tyranids don't have an ultimate goal. No grand design or perfect form they're chasing. They're just running from their own hunger, forever expanding, forever consuming, until either the universe itself collapses, or they finally run into something they can't overcome. And if that happens, will they just die off? Or will they, in their desperation, evolve into something even worse? No one knows for sure whether the Tyranids have a limit. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But the fact that we even have to ask that question is what makes them so terrifying. Because if they don't have a limit, if they truly are endless, then every battle fought against them, every war waged in the name of survival, is nothing more than a temporary delay. A stalling tactic against something that will never stop. And if that's the case, then the real question isn't whether the Tyranids have a limit, it's whether anything else in the galaxy does. The Tyranids aren't just another faction in Warhammer 40k. They're something bigger, something worse. Every other force in the galaxy, no matter how powerful or terrifying, still follows some kind of logic. The Imperium fights to endure. Chaos spreads corruption. The Eldari cling to their past. Even the Necrons, as cold and inhuman as they are, have ambitions beyond destruction. But the Tyranids? They don't want anything in the way we understand it. They don't conquer, they don't negotiate, they don't leave anything behind. They erase, and that's what makes them so horrifying. The galaxy is filled with wars that have been going on for millennia, battles fought over territory, ideology, or revenge. But none of that matters to the hive mind. The Tyranids don't play the same game as the other factions. They are the end of the game. A force that doesn't just threaten civilizations, it threatens the concept of civilization itself. The Imperium can fight chaos forever. Orcs will always find another war. But against the Tyranids, there's no compromise, no stalemate, just the inevitability of consumption. The scariest part is that we still don't know if we've even seen their full strength. What if Behemoth, Kraken, and Leviathan were just scouting forces? What if the real hive fleets, the ones that have already devoured entire galaxies, haven't even arrived yet? What if everything we've seen so far, all the horror, all the destruction, is just the opening act of something even worse? The truth is, no one knows. Maybe even the Tyranids don't know. Maybe the hive mind is still evolving, still becoming something even greater. And if that's the case, then there's no future where the galaxy survives. But then again, isn't that what makes the Warhammer 40k universe what it is? A place where survival isn't guaranteed, where the fight never truly ends, where the only victory is holding on for just a little longer? The Tyranids represent the ultimate unwinnable war. And yet the Imperium still fights, the Eldari still resist, the galaxy, for all its horror, still refuses to die quietly. Maybe that's the final, cruel irony of it all. The Tyranids are inevitable, but so is the struggle against them. And with that, we wrap up this deep dive into the ultimate Tyranid plan. What do you think? Are they just an endless, mindless swarm? Or is there something far more sinister guiding them? Do they have an end goal? Or are they trapped in their own hunger forever? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next lore discussion. Until next time, stay vigilant and pray the hive mind isn't watching.